welcome to worship with Eliot Unitarian Chapel. Wherever you're tuning in from, near or far, we're so glad that you're here. I am Eliot's lead minister, the Reverend Barbara Gadon, and I hope that this is a service that nurtures your spirit. If you are new to Eliot Chapel, we are an intentional community that welcomes all races, genders, and all sexual orientations. We welcome people of all creeds and beliefs, all economic circumstances, and all types of families. Our vision is to create a just world through vibrant, beloved community. If you would like to connect with us and learn more about our congregation, please look for information at the end of the service.
Another world is possible. We say it again and again, even when the proof lies somewhere beyond the horizon, beyond our reach, beyond our imagination. This is our faith. Another world is possible. There are many routes towards liberation, towards freedom, but the abundance of options does not absolve us of the responsibility of acting. Another world is possible.
Here we go. We light this chalice for the warmth of love, the light of truth, and the energy of action. Do it. Do it. Yes.
It's done.
Good job.
As we sing of hope and joy today, some know only anguish and despair. How can we lift our voices in this way, while some have pain and misery to spare? If the crumbling world we would renew, we must sing no ordinary song. Peals from a noisy gong will never do.
always remember the day she helped her father time an eclipse of the sun. She used the chronometer to count down to the exact second that the moon began to block out the sun. Her father needed to send the timing report to his astronomer friends at the Harvard University Observatory, where they are collecting eclipse information from all over. "There will be another eclipse like this in 54 years, said her father. "I'm 12 now. I'll be 66 then," exclaimed Mariah. How could astronomers know so far ahead what would happen in the sky? "I want to study the stars always," decided Mariah one day. "I want to be an astronomer." "Father, can only men be astronomers?" Father thought for a moment. He knew that no matter how smart a girl was, she could not get into a college in the United States to study astronomy. Only boys were allowed to go to college in those days. Finally he said, "There are no women astronomers in America. There are only a few in the entire world. But I do think it is possible, Mariah. I will teach you all I know. Cousin Walter has scientific books to lend you. You will need to study mathematics. That is as important to astronomy as the telescope. Yes, I do think it's possible you could be an astronomer." "Oh, I will study, Father, I will," cried Mariah. True to her word, Mariah spent long hours studying geometry and trigonometry in a tiny room at the foot of the attic stairs. But she spent most evenings studying the sky and keeping careful records on the stars. One night she saw a fuzzy spot through the telescope that she had never seen before. Quickly, she checked the charts to see if a star was supposed to be in that place in the sky. No star was ever there. Could it be a new comet? "Father, come up and look quick," she shouted. Her father dashed up to the roof and peered through the telescope. "You've discovered a comet above the North Star," he exclaimed. "We must write immediately to the Harvard Observatory and tell them. A comet is named for the person who discovered it first, but the discovery doesn't count unless it's reported to an observatory." They wrote a letter that very night, but a storm at sea delayed the mail and leaving the island for 2 days. Soon the comet was also sighted by someone in Italy, then in England and in Germany. The King of Denmark had promised a gold medal to the first person who discovered a comet that could only be seen through a telescope. Would Mariah miss getting the medal because her report was late? Finally, one day a package arrived from the King of Denmark. It was the gold medal. Mariah was the first woman in the world to have a comet named after her. Women all over America were so proud of Mariah that they collected money for a new, larger telescope for her. Now she could learn so much more about the stars and planets. In 1865, a wealthy man named Matthew Vassar had the courage to start a college for women, Vassar College in Poughkeepsie, New York. People called Matthew Vassar an old fool. They said girls didn't need a college education. They just needed to know how to sew and do housework and maybe play the piano a little. College would ruin them for doing housework. There were ministers who thundered, "It is against the will of God for girls to go to college. It will break up families and destroy the country." But Matthew Vassar wanted Mariah to come and teach astronomy. She could have an observatory with the 3rd largest telescope on the continent. "Father, how can I do this?" said Mariah. "I've never even been to college myself. If I'm not any good, then people will say, this proves that women have no business teaching in colleges." "You can do it and do it well," said her father. "You should have no fears." He was right. Mariah's students loved her. The other professors just expected the students to sit and listen to them talk. But Mariah taught her students to question everything and experiment, and to think for themselves.
Our prayer and meditation this morning is by Reverend Tess Baumberger, and it's called Soul Lifts. Wouldn't it be great if you could take a picture of your soul, and then when your parent wanted to brag about you, they could show people the picture and say, "That's my kid. Don't they have a beautiful soul, all sparkly and many-colored and flowing around them?" Wouldn't it be great if we walked around surrounded by our souls so that they were the first thing people saw instead of the last things? Then people would judge us by who we really are instead of how we look. Imagine this. No more racism, ageism, sexism, faddism, shortism, homophobia. Imagine falling in love with who a person is just by looking at them. It would be a kind of cloaking device, hiding physical faults, defects, or even perfections. I'd want it to be mandatory. Then people would work at making their souls more attractive instead of their bodies and faces. Imagine people knowing by your soul that you really need a hug. Imagine people helping each other and their souls changing colors or growing. Imagine soul gyms with exercises to get your sagging soul in shape. Imagine the long lines forming for soul lifts at temples, churches, mosques, synagogues, or nature's grand cathedrals. Imagine. We have a long-standing tradition at Eliot Chapel of sharing our Sunday collection with an organization in our community. And this month, we're sharing our plight with the Meacham Park Neighborhood Improvement Association. Meacham Park is a predominantly African-American community in Kirkwood. Even before Meacham Park was annexed to Kirkwood in the 90s, an intentionally diverse group of Meacham Park and Kirkwood residents formed to advocate for Meacham Park. And Eliot Chapel has long ensured that we have one of our members at the table so that we are always ready to lend a hand and to be part of the solution. When I asked Harriet Patton, president of the association, what it meant for our congregation to make this long-standing commitment, this is what she shared.
It will be a blessing from heaven. A blessing. Because we don't have any church that said we will commit to doing that.
The Neighborhood Improvement Association offers college scholarships and many programs for students, such as a STEM workshop in the spring, Pride in the Park in the summer, school supplies in the fall, and they sponsor 20 families at Christmas. But this has been a very difficult year for Meacham Park. We know that COVID-19 has hit the Black community harder than anyone else, and so has the resulting economic hardship. Their well-loved Martin Luther King event usually pays for most of their programs, and it has been canceled. So we at Eliot Chapel have decided to step up our game. Our goal is to raise $3,000 through our shared plate this month for the Meacham Park Neighborhood Improvement Association, and this will help them continue to serve Meacham Park families, as they always have. I'll let President Harriet Patton have the last word.
And our slogan is to come together, work together, but stay together. And I want to share that with you, your congregation, and know that is evidence in the things we do and not just the things we say. I look forward to seeing you again in the future. I look forward to sharing positive outcomes and positive joining together with that same triangle. Come together, work together, stay together.
This morning's reading is Q by Adam Lawrence Dyer. She leaps out into the intersection, more concerned with her ballet arms than with staying alive. Her parents look the other way with a laugh at some private joke that speaks to their solid intimacy. The little girl skips and dances across the street, wearing shorts that are fine now on an 8-year-old body. But the same shorts and manner may send a different message when she is 20. She's already learning to be unfettered, independent, and free, and so she always will be. You may look at this and say, of course, all children should be this way. But what is the pattern? She's already been told that she's pretty. She's already been instructed to look for a prince because she is daddy's princess, whatever that is. And her strong, independent mother still prioritizes him and his over her own needs. The little girl sees and learns. When they walk, as they pass the black man, Daddy places his hand on the little girl in an unconscious gesture, but one that is real just the same. He's unaware, still laughing with his wife, but the little girl gets the cue and looks sheepishly at the black man. She stops skipping. The black man doesn't see the family. He is headed to perform surgery or lead litigation or maybe save the world. No matter. In that moment, he has become black man, permanently connected to the protective hand of Daddy and the target of a weary stare from underneath the suspicious brow of an 8-year-old who just learned her first racial cue.
When I was little, I was one of those girls who desperately wanted a pony. I was the kid who read and watched every version of Black Beauty and the Black Stallion, and even today I'm addicted to Heartland, a 13-season soap opera set on a horse ranch in Alberta. At our town's summer fair, I would be the girl found spellbound in the horse barns, and I found any reason to go to our neighbors because all their kids had horses and they rode in the fairs in the summer and they barrel raced. Oh, I so wanted to be like those kids. And when I was 12, I got my chance. A family in our church needed to give away their daughter's horse. Did I want her? Of course I wanted her. I was in heaven. Now, Betsy was old and slow and stubborn, but if you could get her to run, she ran so smoothly, it was like you were coasting on air. So Betsy and I started barrel racing with the neighbor family, and although we lost every event, I was so happy. I loved her, and I loved my life. And in 2 years, I had saved enough babysitting money to buy my own horse, a faster and younger horse who actually liked to run. Now, mostly this was a really, really good and positive experience. But at Christmas and birthdays, my grandparents would give my brothers the presents with horse and cowboy themes. Wooden horses, books about horses, cowboy hats, bolo ties. And I would get hair accessories, pretty things, traditional girl stuff, which I had no use for. I was the running the barrels every day, practicing for the next show. I was the one saving babysitting money for boots and a cowboy hat and a bolo tie. And my grandparents' inability to see this big part of my life and give my brothers presents that I would have loved. Oh, it hurt. When you're 13, being known and seen means everything. And while I knew they loved me, I never doubted that they loved me, I hurt because they couldn't imagine their granddaughter as a barrel racer. Our theme this whole month at Eliot Chapel has been imagination, and mostly we've been talking about how our imaginations are a spiritual path to freedom. And we have asked each other to risk imagining great things and to persevere as we create what we have imagined. But on this final Sunday of January, I actually want to take a bit more of a cautious approach and look at how our imaginations can set us back. My grandparents' inability to imagine their granddaughter as a barrel racer didn't happen on its own. They didn't want to be clueless, and they didn't want to hurt me, but they did. And this happened because their generation had been taught to see gender in one way, and they held on to that their whole lives. This month, we had a front row seat to what can happen when the imagination is led astray. On January 6th, a mob broke into the Capitol convinced that the election was stolen. This mob was mostly white, but spanned the social classes. There were convenience store clerks, firefighters, healthcare workers, lawyers, business owners, farmers, veterans, law enforcement, elected leaders, and civil servants. Their resentments had been nurtured over generations. And the cost to our national security, and the cost to those they disagree with, the cost to their own communities and their families, and the cost to people of color and LGBTQ people cannot be underestimated. Misimagination can be a pretty dangerous thing. While this is a pretty extreme example, these misimaginations also happen very close to home. Back last summer, you might remember the story of Christian Cooper. He was bird watching at Central Park, and a white woman called the police and claimed that a black man was assaulting her. You might also remember the story of Ahmaud Arbery, who was shot by 2 white men while jogging in Brunswick, Georgia. Well, around this time, I noticed something new in my drive into town. There's this man I have seen jogging many times along Kiefer Creek Road. He is a fixture. And this summer, he started doing something new. Every time a car drove by, he would smile and wave. Smile and wave. He even smiled and waved at me. And at first I thought, oh my goodness, what a kind thing to do. What a friendly and neighborly thing to do. But then I started wondering if he was waving to protect himself while he jogged in Ellisville, which, like most far west county towns, is over 90% white. When a black man jogs in Ellisville, everyone notices. We know this is true, don't we? Was he worried about what could be happening in the imaginations of those who saw him jog? Would someone call the police and say, there's a suspicious-looking man running on Kiefer Creek Road. He doesn't look like he belongs here. Could you come check it out? For people of color, being able to foresee what is happening in the imaginations of white people, let me reframe that. For people of color, being able to foresee what is happening in the misimaginations of white people is often what's between you and getting a job, keeping a job, buying groceries, going to the bank, picking up your kids from school, and getting home safe. So the question that I'm asking us to consider is, what's in your imagination? And how did it get there? What's in our misimaginations? And how did it get there? As Unitarian Universalists, we often pride ourselves on being on the right side of history. 2/3 of our ministers and seminarians marched to Selma. We were the first denomination to witness for same-sex marriage. We marched against Vietnam and for nuclear disarmament. We helped start Planned Parenthood. We have a great track record of showing up. But we also have a strong spiritual tradition of looking inward and questioning our conscience and our heart. Just because we're thinking something doesn't make it right. Just because we believe something doesn't mean it's true. Just because we have an opinion doesn't make it right, doesn't make it fact. We affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person, not the inherent worth and dignity of every idea. Now, for those of you who are theists, we will say that when you look in your heart, this is where you will hear the voice of God. This is where you discern the hope God has for you and who you can be. But if you are misimagining something, if your imagination is being filtered through any of the systemic interlocked oppressions that shape our lives, your misimagining is standing in the way of hearing that voice or living into that hope. Our spiritual calling is to drain the power of that misimagining so that the voice we are longing to hear will reach us and be known by us and become part of us. Now, I know that many of us aren't theists, so let me rephrase that in a different way. What you're examining and the way you name it is your inner truth, your inner conscience, or that higher power or oneness that you are striving to meld with. And our misimaginations are like a wall between us and that thing we're striving to meld with. And we need to drain it so that we can, in fact, move where we are called to go. Now, the challenge for all of us is that we have grown up in a deeply flawed society with some very dehumanizing and damaging beliefs. And we are fools if we think that our imaginations are immune to its shaping. No one is actually that strong. We all have misimaginations that are creating a roadblock to wholeness. A part of God couldn't happen when my grandparents misimagined me. And a part of God or the spirit of life can't happen as long as the man who jogs through Ellisville keeps waving and smiling, and as long as I keep worrying about him. So how does this clearing of our misimaginations happen? Isn't that the million-dollar question that we have been working on for hundreds of years in our liberal religious tradition? If you grew up in the Christian tradition, as I did, no doubt you were taught the story of the disciple Paul. And even though I don't identify as Christian anymore, I still find a lot of meaning in all those Bible stories I was taught. I've certainly had to reimagine them, strip away some of what I learned in Sunday school that I've come to believe were misimaginations about these Bible stories. But in those formative years when I was sitting in those Sunday school rooms, the same years that I was barrel racing, I was absorbing these stories and figuring them out for myself. So let me refresh you about the story of Paul. Paul first appears as Saul in the book of Acts and gets a lot of focus starting in chapter 9. Saul was a Jew who was a citizen of Rome, which gave him a higher station in society than most Jews. He had a stake in the Roman Empire, and he was on a mission to take down those who followed Jesus, who he saw as politically dangerous. And as he was walking down the road to Damascus with the intention of taking down a few of those disciples, he was struck by a bright light and heard Jesus say to him, "Saul, oh Saul, why are you persecuting me? Get up and go to Damascus where you will be told what to do." And Saul got up, but he couldn't walk to Damascus because he couldn't see. And he had to be led by the hand to the town. And then he didn't eat or drink for 3 days. A disciple of Jesus, Ananias, came to him and laid his hand on Saul's head and said, "I've been sent so that you can get your sight back and be filled with the Holy Spirit." Saul regained his sight and his heart was opened, and he was baptized, and he joined the disciples that he had been planning to kill. And later, after he gained the trust of the disciples, Luke renamed him Paul. Now, for our purposes, I am less interested in the literal meaning that I was taught in Sunday school, that Paul converted to Christianity. I am way more interested in his transformation as a mythic journey that gives us a roadmap when exploring the own potential in each of our hearts for transformation. I want to map the reimagining of our misimaginations onto the Saul to Paul transformation. Let me restate that because I know that it's a mouthful. I want to map the reimagining of our misimagining onto the Saul to Paul transformation. So the unexamined imagination, the misimagination, is like the pre-conversion Saul. The unexamined reactive imagination is very dangerous. It can't change. It reinforces systems of oppression. It reacts with violence to anything that challenges it. Physical violence, spiritual violence, emotional violence. But then something happens. Saul is struck by the light and cannot see and lives without food or water for 3 days. This shock to the system is what often happens when we begin to understand the ways we have been taught, sometimes by those we trusted most of all. Parents, teachers, family, neighbors, dear friends. We've been taught, the ways we have been taught are doing harm. It's lonely. It's jarring. We don't know what to trust anymore. Can we even trust ourselves? If you've ever done anti-racism work, you've probably heard the term getting woke. You get woke when you start to realize and observe the power of racism in you and in society. Well, Paul got woke. When Ananias comes, the light returns, and Saul experiences everything in a new way. And as he gains the trust of those he harmed, they take him in and even give him a new name. In Hebrew, the name Paul means small or humble. And this smallness and humbleness is often exactly what it takes to get out of that jarring place. It is humbling to admit, for instance, that you have internalized some of the racial prejudices that you abhor, or that you may treat your daughter differently than your son, or that you aren't as ready to embrace a transgender relative as you thought you were. I remember in one of my first jobs out of college, being pulled aside by one of the men, and he said, "Do you realize that you listen to my opinions more than you listen to the opinions of the women at the table?" No, I didn't realize it, and I couldn't believe it. I resisted it, and I went home and incredulously told my partner, and she agreed. Yeah, Krista, you really do that. I'm sorry, hun, but you do. And it took me aback, and it stopped me solid. You know, man, that was a hard one to take in. Me, a proud feminist, was like Saul being struck by light on the road to Damascus. I was being woke. But if I wanted to be more whole and I wanted to do right by the people I worked with, I had to acknowledge it was true and start to drain its power. And the first thing I did was call the people I had hurt, the women, and apologize. I'm so sorry. I'm going to try and not do that again. And then I called the man and thanked him for his honesty. And I hope that it gave us a chance to start again. But to this day, I wonder if I could have heard that feedback from one of the women. Did it take a man for me to take it seriously? I think this wondering is a healthy thing. It keeps us on our toes because it is always possible for the Saul to Paul transformation to revert back to Saul, and we're back in that place of misimagining. If you've ever done anti-racism work, if you've started to unwind the way your imagination has been twisted by systemic racism, you know this process never ends. Now, I really hope that all of us have had some of our own Saul to Paul misimagination transformations, because the promise is always new life, not only for ourselves, but especially for those who bear the harm of our misimaginations. We have to drain their power for ourselves and for those we love and for our communities, and for our world, really. I am so thankful that my parents supported my love of horses. They definitely gulped a bit when I drained my bank account to buy a horse, but they let me do it. And truth be told, I wasn't ever that good a barrel racer. I never could cinch a saddle tight enough. I fell all the time and still have the scars from when I fell into a fence. I even have lasting damage to my wrist because I tripped on a bridle strap and Betsy just kept walking. But I got to try. I got to love 2 horses, and my parents' support, their ability to imagine me as I was, helped to neutralize how disappointed I was not to get my grandparents' affirmation, not to be hemmed in by their misimagination about who I was. When we reimagine our misimaginations, that's when all those promises that Reverend Barbara and I and Amy Hunter made this last month in all of our Sunday services about how the imagination can set us free, that's how those promises kick in. So when you find yourself on the road to Damascus, struck by a blinding light, see it as a sign that you're ready. You can do this. We can do this. Blessings on you and yours, and love to you all.
We are climbing Jacob's ladder. We are climbing Jacob's ladder. We are climbing Jacob's ladder. We are climbing on. Every round goes higher, higher. Every round goes higher, higher. Every round goes higher, higher. We are climbing on. If I stumble, will you help me? If I stumble, will you help me? If I stumble, will you help me? We are climbing on. Though the road is steep and rugged, though the road is steep and rugged, though the road is steep and rugged, we are climbing on.
We extinguish this chalice, but not the warmth of love, the fire of commitment, or the blessing of beloved community. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Love to you all. Go ahead.
Woohoo!